Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com.
Well, 200, episode 200. After so many times, 6 years later, etc., we've hit our 200th episode. Kind of feels funny having, I knew that we would eventually get to that, and I'm sure we'll have plenty more milestones in the future. But I guess something around, getting to 200 is kind of a special thing for this humble little podcast that we're doing here.
Wow, Ben, you're obviously a brave man if you ever thought we'd get to 200. I live week by week here, but fantastic achievement. Thank you very much for steering us this far.
And to all of you for watching and putting up with our ramblings every week or so. The interesting thing, we started a little over 6 years ago. I think it was September 2014. I rewatched our very first episode a little earlier, and we're going to do like a bit of a bookend is not the right term because we're not ending, but just doing a circle back to what we discussed in that very first episode and some of the topics we're talking about today. But just as an initial thing, I'm just going to share some photos now where, the first photo is essentially the ridge. That was the setup that I took that photo on that first episode. That was the setup, and the second photo that you'll see is today's setup that we're doing for the 200th episode. And what really what I loved about that photo from six plus years ago was that I thought that we'd started using the iPhone 6 by that point, but it's very clear that we were on the iPhone 5, and the fact that it was producing 1080p video just fine way back then, no problems at all. And it was just, it was a different time, but if you actually look carefully at both photos, like essentially what my setup here hasn't really changed. And for the purposes of what we're doing, I've got the 12 Pro Max recording me at the moment in bloody 10-bit Dolby Vision HDR 4K 60 frames per second, but it's not something, it's great that those improvements are made, but for the purposes of this, I guess it's sort of overkill. But it's good that the technology has progressed that way, but it's also made things so much easier to sort of produce along the way.
Well, it just goes to show, I think how far we've come, and very often, incrementally with every new release of a phone, we think we haven't really made that many or that much of an advance, but it's quite clear now. We could shoot in 4K now if we wanted, and beam it live. So, which are all things that we couldn't even have done when this, SciTech Culture podcast started. So, who knows where we'll be in another 200 eps.
Oh, and shout out to the microphone too. That was still the same even from back then too. One thing I did want to touch on before we get into the topics too is that obviously I was doing a bit of research, watching some of the videos from back then, etc. And I have to say that as of last year, I'm really happy that the Apple keynotes don't have choruses of applause anymore. It was actually quite cringeworthy because the one that we actually discussed this in our first episode, which had to do with the Apple Watch and how they did the one more thing at that event, and everyone's like giving Tim Cook a standing ovation as he walks out with the watch on his wrist, and it just seems so cringy. It was cringy then, but I think it's just an extra level of it now. Looking back on it, if anything was going to date something like an event like that, it's that sort of stuff.
Well, I think, the truth is that was already a fairly old presentation format, the keynote at that point. So it was probably on its last legs then. And of course, other tech companies have adopted similar keynote sort of offerings as well. And I think, probably maybe if there was one thing that maybe good came out of COVID was that it mercifully ended that sort of keynote. And now, probably from now on, we'll have the super produced Zoom presentations, and you can applaud like crazy in the privacy of your own home.
It's much better that way. I did appreciate the Hollywood production values that were inputted into some of those in the past year or so, and let's hope they just keep it up. And not to mention, if you think about it, it's saving a lot of time, money, and effort for all the people that weren't, say, Apple employees attending the event, who actually did go to the event from the media, etc. They don't have to go somewhere now. They can just watch the live stream and go at it accordingly.
I think that's changing everything. I mean, and the big question, maybe we'll answer it, in a year or two, is will those live presentations ever make a comeback? And you might be right there. You might have hit on something, maybe not.
Absolutely. All right. So circling back to our first episode, I won't dwell on it too much because you can obviously just click on it and have a look at yourself as to what we were talking about back then. But essentially, it had to do with mobile and wearable technology in our daily lives. And I think before I get into these other specifics that we were talking about here around VR and AR and some of the latest stories that we've got here, it's interesting that like some of the things that we were talking about in there, watches, clothing, glasses, all that sort of stuff, there was kind of a verb at the time, or a vibe, I guess, that was kind of suggesting that this sort of stuff was going to be imminent, or at least in the next couple of years from that point, that, we were going to start to see this stuff a lot more. And just looking back over the past 6 years, it just seems like we really haven't gotten much further than the watch in terms of mainstream adoption. And to be honest, I was a bit dubious. I was a lot more dubious than I remembered actually in that episode about the watch itself. I still don't have a watch. I don't feel like I have a need for it if I've got my phone coming with me everywhere. It just seems like a nice to have thing, but it's just interesting that none of that stuff ever has really eventuated, except for the watch. I'll give them the watch. That's kind of hung around, and it's got a lot more capable since that initial offering that Apple put out.
Yeah, look, I think that's a really interesting observation. There was that feel at that time that suddenly wearables were it, and we were going to be wearing it, not just like, wearing our phones. They were going to be part of our jacket, or jeans or whatever. But, I think the only thing that we've really seen lately is they're including pockets in women's Lycra clothing for phones now, which is something new.
Very high tech.
Very high tech. But I think, maybe, back then, there were questions still around, battery life in phones and performance, et cetera, and that somehow wearable could increase the usability or the functionality of your device. But I think we've seen, and probably should have expected, battery technology's gone through the roof and phone technology's gone through the roof. So the phone is still the dominant device. I mean, Apple Watches are very, very nice, but I'm not sure they really give you anything over your phone. It's just they give you something special in a range of watches, but not really in terms of your connectivity or device sort of style. I guess the one thing that I really am probably surprised about is that something like Google Glass hasn't made a comeback. I know I got a lot of bad press at the time. And I think now, if it was sold probably without a camera feature, it'd probably go quite well. So we haven't seen that. And glasses are the only other wearable that I can think besides a watch that could really get a hold, because phones now, as we've been talking about, whether you're producing a podcast or whether you're just going about your daily business, are amazing.
Absolutely. Just like there's the rumor that Apple's working on its set of glasses without the camera, because they're obviously privacy focused, and they obviously don't want to create a product that introduces a level of creepiness into the fold, which is apparently what the Google Glass thing, that was one of the things that was a bash against that. But just before I get on to this VR story and what Apple's another rumor that Apple's working on, just on the smartphone itself too, is the fact that I think there was a couple of years there where I think the smartphone kind of plateaued a little bit in terms of introducing new features, and I've noticed an uptick maybe in the last 2 years, with multi-camera. Like that, you don't get a camera in a smartphone anymore. You get a camera system, and it's so much more superior to what previous phones used to have with just a single camera. And even in a mid-tier phone, you're getting that type of camera system, and it's kind of increasing the productivity that you can get out of a phone more now. It's like there's a sort of an uptick in what you can do with a phone now as well. And that's just the camera. There's a lot of other things, LiDAR and AR type applications, et cetera, that are making the phone even more useful than what they were before.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And I think, you look at some of the things that start but never quite take off, in the history or the generations of mobile phones. Now, it was only, probably 3 or 4 years ago that you could buy lens kits for your phone, and they were quite popular for about 12 months. And then, as you're saying, like the phone companies responded by putting in camera systems, 3 lenses. You don't need to buy a professional lens anymore because you've got a choice of 3, which your camera system selects the best option. And then the processing power now inside your mobile device is so good that you're getting a professional quality image, and then you can layer a professional quality filter over the top. So, this is how far we've come. And I think, for all intents and purposes, this is why the phone or the mobile device is ahead of any other wearable, because it's the right size to allow the processing power and battery power that's required. Maybe apart from earbuds, I'm not sure that there's any other wearable device that gives you bang for your buck in terms of, power sort of output and length or duration of use.
Absolutely. Well, all right, well, let's talk about this story about Apple's rumored VR headset. There's also, I mentioned before, glasses as well. So there's probably a distinction, like who knows what form this product will take. Obviously, existing headsets, it could be as big as a helmet covering your head, or it could be just a visor over your eyes kind of thing. There's variations of that. But this idea that they're creating...
You look like a stormtrooper from Apple.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll go over well in their marketing department, I'm sure. The latest sort of rumor is this VR headset that would feature dual 8K screens, one for each eye, I guess.
Oh God!
And obviously they'll charge a gazillion dollars for it, and only 5 people will be able to buy it. But it'll be like one of those headline product type things if they ever do release it. But it goes to show that there is still an appetite for investigating where this technology sort of lies, I guess, especially when you sort of say go beyond Apple and you have a look at, like that broader description of, or I guess the stories of like other companies like Sony, Microsoft, etc., who have been investigating all of these options. And it seems as if a lot of those companies are still trying to find a way to find the market for it, and what type of features, what type of design, what type of functionality, how does it all come together in a package that would appeal to the mainstream consumer. And it seems like even after all this time, it's not VR and AR and all that, it's not new, not conceptually. It's been around for a long time and it still hasn't cracked through.
Well, look, I just take a step out of this particular discussion and go to an analogy, which is obviously 3D in cinema. They threw everything at it 4 or 5 years ago, and where is it now? Like all the 3D films have stopped coming out, and there was a moment there where everything came out in 3D. So I think Oculus, when it first came out, is amazing, and a lot of those headsets were amazing when they came out. Now, with the power, the next level or generation of computing power, they're even better. And there's amazing things that you can do. There's no question. But as we were talking about before, and as you're saying now, it's not quite clear where the market is. We think maybe it's gaming, we think maybe it's training, but I haven't been to too many training courses where they put an AR helmet on your head. So, we are searching for what this technology really does do. What does an augmented, alternate, virtual technology really bring to the table for the mainstream? I think that's the key.
Well, just as an example, and I'll loop this other story in about the haptic gloves that apparently made a debut at CES this year. The idea of training, for instance, so these gloves would, with your VR headset on as well, obviously, presumably, could replicate an environment. Say you maybe have to handle hazardous materials or something, and that would give you a virtual sort of experience of what the real experience would be like. But again, that's not exactly consumer mainstream. That's a very specific, almost industry specific training environment. And not to say that that's not valid, and maybe that's the only niche that this sort of technology ends up reaching, but it seems like or even other things like being able to view other environments from the safety of a room that doesn't have COVID in it or something, or something like that. And that it just seems like it's a technology where you think, yeah, you could see how it could be used. You could see how a lot of people could get into it, but unlike the phone, where you're buying it and it's got a very specific reason, and you can see why so many billions of people would have one, there just isn't that argument for why billions of people would have a VR headset or an AR headset.
And I'd like to hear from gamers on this as well, because I completely agree. I think I've used Google Cardboard quite extensively, and I've enjoyed it, and I've thought it's actually pretty good, even though it's at the low end of your headsets, you know. But it's pretty good. Like the apps, that you can tour the universe, or, go and look at wildlife in its natural habitat and all that sort of thing. And sure, it's impressive. I think there are two things about it, though. You do get quite tired wearing headsets. And the second thing is that unless somebody is experiencing what you're experiencing alongside of you, it's really a very solo experience. And once again, if you want to use an analogy, effectively now for the gamer, and I'd like to hear from gamers to tell us a bit more about this, but if you've got an 80-inch screen, on a wall with surround sound, and then you've got like a haptic controller, you're effectively as close to VR as perhaps we need to be. And the idea of the fully immersive then, is a nice idea, a bit like 3D for every film, but you don't actually need to be immersed in a film if it's really the story that you're consuming. So, I just wonder if that's perhaps what holds back this idea of fully immersive technologies, in that haptic controllers in your hand and a good screen with very good graphics or visuals and sound system is probably enough. That's immersive enough for most humans.
Not to mention that, a few years from now, 80 inches will probably be on the small end of the scale in terms of screen size. We're probably going to have 120, 130-inch screens that gamers could probably mount on their walls. And how much more immersive can you get, really?
Oh, thanks for the heads up, Ben. I'm going to have to buy a bigger house.
Yeah, that's gonna do wonders for everyone, isn't it? Those McMansions suddenly make sense, don't they? Oh, absolutely. All right, we might wrap it up there. It'll be interesting. I wonder if if we're still doing this in this capacity in 6 years' time, a bit like how 6 years ago we were talking about this mobile and wearable technology, whether what we were talking about today, how it will look that far in the future, looking back, whether anything would have changed by then, or whether we're just got more better versions of everything we've got right now.
Well, there's only one way to find out, and that's to wait that time and move into the future ourselves. But I mean, the reality is if we look back, as we have over this episode, and we were to postulate what the future might hold, I think we will have to see some big changes soon, simply because the processing power now, or the ability to design processing units is really ramping up, and I think we can see that through Apple's silicon range.
Absolutely. Well, happy 200th episode, Steve. It was another good chat, I think, and let's see if we can get another 200 out at some point.
If we keep going one step at a time, we'll definitely get there.
Absolutely. All right, so don't forget to check out our website, scitechculture.com. You can get all of our links and content there. We greatly appreciate your visits to our website, and hopefully we'll be producing for quite some time yet. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.